Hey, Sean McElroy here with an Autoline exclusives, and joining me today is author Roger Miners. He's the author of a book that's coming out called McLaren, the Engine Company. Now, I think the name there gives people a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So, Roger, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where's your passion come from?
I cannot remember not liking cars. I'm that little kid who's 5 years old and names every car that goes by on the street. So um, my whole life I've loved cars, and that's anything with motors. It can fly, it can float, it can ride on the streets. Doesn't matter. So I've always loved them.
So, McLaren, where does McLaren fit into all of this for you?
Well, it was a very famous racing company back in the 60s, and that's where I first heard of them. And they first heard of them when Bruce McLaren won the first Formula One race in the United States at Sebring at age 22 or something like that. So I then followed his career all the way until he passed away in 1970.
Yeah, I believe that US GP of his made him the youngest GP winner of the time.
Yes,
which was pretty cool.
That went until I think might have been Vettel or somebody eclipsed that. But still, he was a famous person.
Yeah, huge accomplishment for sure. In his first season of racing in Formula One. So tell us a little bit about the book. What years are we covering of McLaren in your book here?
We have a backstory that goes all the way back to Bruce's beginning. Just to name the players, there was Bruce. There were the Americans, Teddy Mayer, who ran the team and was Bruce's partner. He ran the team after Bruce died. And there was a man from New York named H. William Smith, Jr., who was a car enthusiast. And he met Bruce early on in Bruce's career when he came to the United States and raced in 64 and 65. And they became friends along with Teddy, and Bill provided a lot of support services for him in America, letting him run out of his car dealer's shop, running for parts and procuring supplies. And so the three of them are covered before we get started on the book. So we have a section on that history and background. And then when Bruce was running Can-Am from 66 on, one of the biggest problems was engines. He was buying engines from Traco in California. Then he hired an engine wizard named Gary Knutson, who was at Chaparral at the time. And he came and worked for McLaren in 67 and 68, just running out of a shop in California. And finally, they decided to build their own engines. So they hired a engine builder out of Traco, and he went to England in 69 and built big block Chevy racing engines. His name was George Bolthoff. He was a drag racer, and he was in 69. The engines he built powered 11 straight victories in the Can-Am.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about Bruce is, the McLaren company is so popular, but, I feel like sometimes maybe more so with my generation, I know even I'm guilty of it, that I didn't know a whole lot about Bruce McLaren. And, doing a little bit of research for this, one of the things that I found so interesting, and, you kind of touched on it a little bit with the engine development there, was that, man, he was a keen engineer. And,
Yes.
just looking at some of the designs and things that they had going on in their cars that he didn't like and was able to tinker with, and just his understanding was quite amazing.
And one of the keys to their dominance was the fact that they would have the next year's car ready early before the season started, and they got a lot of testing done in England before they even sent the cars over. So the cars were fully sorted and ready to go, while everybody else showed up and had done very little testing. So they could just come to the track and race and go home instead of doing their development at the racetrack.
Those are the ones that are really popular, that are known, the engines and the Can-Am cars. But McLaren engines did so much more than that.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit of an idea of the scope of McLaren engines, just beyond those Can-Am cars?
During the Can-Am, they started doing engineering work for Chevrolet, first in racing engines, and then the marine division of Chevrolet. McLaren actually became their engineering department because they couldn't get a dyno time. They had to compete against the production car engineers, and so we did a lot of that. That gave us entree into actually doing engineering work, and we could, for instance, we were working on a turbocharger for the DeLorean. It was not a very successful program for two reasons. One, the Peugeot engine that they were using, the Volvo Peugeot V6, was not up to being turbocharged. And the second thing was DeLorean went bankrupt right in the middle of the program. But that was a typical thing. We would get work in from primarily General Motors, but we did work for BMW. Not only in racing, we ran two race teams for them in the 70s and 80s. We did a lot of engine rebuilding work, but as time went by, and it was during we developed the Buick Indy engine, and that led to a job to build a supercar for Buick called the GNX, which is a pretty famous car these days.
Oh yeah, very, very sought after, very cool car. Definitely something that I know when I was first starting to get interested in the cars, that was one of those ones that, kind of piques the interest a bit.
Yes, and that was done according to General Motors protocols, all the testing that had to be done, all the engine validation, so forth. And so after that, we got a big program with Pontiac to build a turbocharged Pontiac Grand Prix. That car came out with only 125 horsepower, and we upped it to 205 and made it more respectable. So one thing led to another, and we were doing more work in the engineering area than in the racing area. And so that transformed the company. And that came about because we had Can-Am, as you may know, ended for McLaren after the 72 season, when Roger Penske blew everybody away with that Porsche 917. We then continued with the Indianapolis program. McLaren raced at Indianapolis starting 50 years ago in 1970. And by 1979, they had left to go concentrate on Formula One. At that time, we could have just shut the company down because that's what its purpose was, to support the McLaren racing team. But we had so much engineering work that Bill Smith and Teddy Mayer decided to keep it going and see if we could make it. And it worked out.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting that to see a company like that that has all this expertise in racing. And, I mean, it does make total sense that it was able to sort of transition into much more than that and is, well known for engineering now. Roger, I think we should let people know that you worked at McLaren Engines the 80s and 90s, is that correct?
That's right.
So you have a lot of firsthand experience that you've been talking about here. And one of the things interesting with your time frame being there, I was really curious if you ever got to see an F1, if anything ever came to you guys there.
Yes, we did have a McLaren Formula One car come a couple of times just for minor repairs, maybe that something got hurt during shipping or something, nothing spectacular, but it was cool to have a car in the shop.
Oh yeah, no doubt. That would have been just amazing. And in researching this book, I've got to imagine that there was just so much stuff to go through. And you already seem super knowledgeable on the subject, but was there an interesting story that you learned in all of this that you didn't know before?
Let me think about that. It really related more to meeting people that I'd read about in the press. I had actually seen Bruce in 1969 down in Texas when he won the Texas Can-Am race. But I just from afar, now suddenly I was working with some of these people like Gary Knutson and Wiley McCoy and others. To just get to know these people was interesting in itself.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point there. Just the amount of names that come attached to a person like Bruce McLaren are just astounding. I mean, you can't, it's hard to even start to name a few of them because, the Fittipaldis, the Laudas, just the racers alone, I mean, are amazing that go along with it. So I've got to imagine that there's some amazing stories.
Well, when you're a day-to-day employee, it suddenly becomes work, and not in a bad way, but you're just working with these people, and it's I won't say it's no big deal, but it's not at the top of your list. You're getting the job done, basically. So no, I can't think of a time when I was surprised to learn something new. It was just great being with high quality people that were experts in their field, and that was a satisfaction in itself.
No, I mean, I can see why it makes such an interesting topic for a book. You got racing in there, development, engineering, all sorts of just cool topics, and a lot of technology that was going on.
Well, that's what made doing the book so interesting. Yeah, people have heard of McLaren engines, but what does that mean? No, nothing. It was all McLaren, the English company, but they were based here in Livonia, Michigan, of all places. and going out and winning Indianapolis and winning Can-Am championships. And it was something, that part was not known to the general public. So I hope just what little I could cover in the book gives a better idea of how all this worked back then.
No, Roger, I mean, it sounds like a super interesting story. So when will people be able to find this book, and where can they find it?
They can find it on the SAE website. It's called sae.org. And you go there, they're the publisher. There will be a bookstore that they can click on, and then the serial number of the book is R485. So find that. That's McLaren, the engine company, the book. And then you can order it. Actually, you can order it online as an online ebook, or you can order the actual book. Same price. So I think I'd order the book. But if you want to read it right now, click on the ebook.
Yeah, two great ways. I mean, sometimes there's nothing like having a good old book in your hands and you got to turn the pages yourself.
Yeah.
Roger Miners, author of McLaren, the Engine Company. Thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.